Hi, this is T-Levels Year 2 Attachment Theory Revision podcast, and we're going to discuss the three main theories in this topic today. Okay, so first of all we're going to discuss John Bowlby. His main principle was about a child's need to make one main attachment, and that would be the strongest base of their development later on in life. It was the idea that children were pre-programmed and had the innate need for an attachment, specifically to the mother figure. And then he looked into and theorised about maternal deprivation, which is the loss or a lack of a mother figure in a child's life. And the lack or loss of this was believed to cause delinquency and psychopathy in children as they grow up into adults. And the thought was that this bond had to be made before 2 years and 6 months, otherwise these effects would happen.
Bowlby's theory had a mix of pros and cons. So to start with the pros, the idea he developed that children need a strong attachment to learn and maintain healthy development is still continued into attachment theory today. That's carried on through Ainsworth, Schaffer and Emerson, all modern attachment theorists. Every theory he suggested was based on his real life experience, how he has actually experienced the world around him, and everything like that.
Some of the cons of Bowlby's theory was that he never actually tested it himself, so he had no evidential backing. He had a limited view of the children's needs and circumstances, and it's been proven since that children are more than capable of forming multiple attachments, not just one. Moving on to Ainsworth, she was Bowlby's student who built on his ideas. She conducted an experiment called the Strange Situation in 1969. This situation conducted different adults and their children being put into a room to test the child's reaction of when their adult would leave a room and put in a stranger in the room to see how the child would react. From this experiment, she was able to see there were 3 different types of attachments the children had formed. These attachments consisted of secure, which was an expected response. They became upset when their adult would leave, but fine when their adult would return, and that was 70% of children. 15% of the children were insecure and ambivalent. This meant that they had an anxious response and weren't easily settled when the adult had returned. 15% was insecure avoidant, so there was a little to no reaction or distress when the adult left the room and returned. Additionally, in 1990, Main and Solomon added disorganised attachment, which meant no consistent response or behaviour, and that was 4% of children.
Ainsworth's theory had a range of pros and cons. The pros were the fact that she actually did the experiment, so there's evidential backing behind what she theorised at the end of it. She tried to base the activity and where it was set on the home learning environment to be able to mimic the natural relationship between a mother and their child.
Ainsworth's theory had a range of cons. There was a large cultural bias as the sample she took was only involved Americans. That's a very geographically limiting part of the theory. She assumed that there would be no change in attachment style as the child developed further, whether they became more securely or less securely attached based on home experience, life experience. There was ethical concerns due to the infant's distress throughout the experiment, especially the insecure, ambivalently attached children who had a very intense reaction. There's also an argument that there was low ecological validity due to the fact that it was conducted in a stressful lab environment. Though she did try and model the room after a home learning environment, it was still unfamiliar to the children. The experiment also took place in 1969, so there is an argument of whether the experiment is still relevant today. And moving on to Schaffer and Emerson, who performed a longitudinal study observation of 60 babies in order to understand the timing and stages of infant attachment. They identified 4 attachment stages, the first being asocial, which ranged between 0 and 6 weeks, and they found that infants in this stage had no preference for any person, and they found that all stimuli was the same, whether it be toys, objects, or person. The second is indiscriminate, which ranged between 6 weeks and 7 months, in which the children preferred people over toys and objects. The next is specific, which ranged between 7 and 9 months, where they found separation anxiety would begin to develop and infants would have a preference for their primary caregiver. And the final stage is multiple, which continued from 10 months onwards, in which infants would form a range of attachments with a variety of caregivers and people that they interacted with regularly. Schaffer and Emerson generally concluded that the quality of a child's attachment to their primary caregiver was more important than the amount of time spent with their caregiver.
Some of the pros that Schaffer and Emerson had was that their theory had evidential backing from the Glasgow experiment. It was a longitudinal experiment, meaning that they had extensive data to back their theory.
So the cons in this part of the experiment was that it was done in 1964, so the experiment is now outdated and isn't as relevant in modern times. The experiment sample was only taken in Glasgow, so there's a cultural bias as if there was not a variety of children from different areas and backgrounds. The experiment was also in the home, so there was no control over the environment the experiment was done in, which obviously changes the effects of the experiment.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. Feel free to hit that like and subscribe button to tune in for more revision help.